Hello, good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to yet another PSC webinar. We're so happy that you're here. I gotta say, just before this webinar started, we were reminded by the group of people behind the scenes here today that we are just barreling through space on this lovely planet, and we get to do cool things like have webinars. So today we're not talking about barreling through space, we're talking about EPR for pet brands navigating the 2026 multi-state deadline. Wow, this is so important. We hear about EPR all the time, so we're really happy to spend the next hour with rePurpose Global talking about that. I gotta say too, thank you so much to our webinar sponsors, rePurpose as well as WPA. WPA has sponsored our whole series of webinars this year, and we couldn't do it without their support. I am Allison Reeser Hamburger. I'm the Director of Sustainability and Innovation here at the Pet Sustainability Coalition. So let's get into it without further ado. So if you are new to the Pet Sustainability Coalition, we are working towards a vision where every single product on shelf, every single choice for pets supports a thriving planet. And I think it's worth noting too that right now that's not the case. Unfortunately, some of the things we buy for our pets and do for our pets actually harms ecosystems. And ultimately, when something harms ecosystems, it comes back to harm us and our wonderful, wonderful pets. So the way that we're working towards that future is to work with companies in the pet industry through collaboration, education, and innovation. So no matter where you are in your sustainability journey as a pet industry company, you're welcome to join because this is a big mission and we can't do it one company at a time. So here are some of our members. You'll notice that we work with companies across the supply chain. So we have retailers, distributors, manufacturers, brands, suppliers as well. And we also work globally. So it's really important that, again, maybe this is why it's relevant that we are on a planet barreling through space. We can't do this as one country, so we're a global organization working across markets. So if you see your logo here, or if you're a PSC member, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us here today. And if you are not a PSC member, but you want to be part of this movement, please consider joining. We do know that it's not just for the protection of ourselves and our planet that we're doing this work, but pet owners really love sustainable products. So there's certainly something to be said about a competitive advantage as well, too. And next, just a few announcements of some upcoming exciting things that we have going on at PSC. We have an Astro Earth Week sales event, April 20th through 26th. Essentially, we have gotten some of our accredited members to sign on. And so if you are an indie retailer, it's really easy to activate this sales in your retail environment to promote some of our sustainable products. We will also be at Pet Food Forum in Kansas City later in April, and you don't want to miss our axe throwing happy hour. This has become an iconic PSC event. We love throwing axes and talking about sustainability. We also, in July, are officially going to do our second ever Plastic Recovery July, also in partnership with rePurpose Global. So lots more coming soon about that, but know that you have an opportunity to kind of reduce your plastic impact by participating. And finally, Impact Unleashed tickets are officially on sale, so get yours now, no reason to wait. That is our signature event in Boulder, Colorado, where PSC is based out of in November. So all of those links can be found in the chat and also here on the screen. Okay, because we are here in this Zoom environment, I love the reactions that I'm seeing. So if you haven't found that button yet, that little heart icon in the center, react, lets us know that you are out there as an audience. We can't see you, but we know you're there. So thank you for reacting. There's a few other buttons that I want to point out to you. Feel free to use the chat feature if you just want to say hello, introduce yourself, maybe chat with other attendees. But the most important one is the Q&A. So if you have a question that you would like us to address at the end of this session, we will have time for that. So please put those types of questions in the Q&A feature, not in the chat. Okay, so now we're really getting into it. Before I hand it over to our speaker, I wanted to give some context on EPR. It is so important, but if you are new to EPR, That is okay. It stands for Extended Producer Responsibility. And essentially, it's a policy framework that charges producers, which means mostly brands in this case, a per pound fee on their packaging. And that's important because the fee is not the same. Essentially, the harder something is to recycle, the more that fee is going to be. So this does a couple of things. There's two main goals of EPR. The first is to fund critical infrastructure. So the way it stands now, the burden of dealing with these materials falls to municipalities. And so with those fees, it essentially shifts the burden from cities and taxpayers and people and municipalities over to the brands that are putting that stuff on the market. And that funding is really important because right now our recycling system could use some help. It could use some different technology to be able to deal with all of the materials that we are throwing at it. The second important feature is incentivizing sustainable design of better packaging through eco-modulation. And that's that chart that you see over on the other side of the screen. So essentially you have lower fees for packaging that is either a reuse model, or really easily recyclable, and then you pay higher fees for stuff that has to go to the landfill or isn't recyclable. So that naturally incentivizes companies to move towards more sustainable or more recyclable packaging. Okay, so at this point, I want to take a second to launch a poll. So hopefully you should see something pop up on your screen now. We want to know just where are you in the EPR process? So take a couple seconds to give us your answer. Your options are still figuring out if it applies to us, registered but haven't started reporting, reported for one state, or reported across multiple states. And if states implies US, these laws are actually global, so please consider state also as a country or other place as well. Okay, feel free to take a few more seconds. I'm seeing the live results, and we're kind of split between the first option, still figuring out if it applies to us, and reported across multiple states already. Okay, let's go ahead and end the poll. Okay, yeah, so we have people across the whole spectrum. So we're so glad you're here. This is going to be relevant no matter where you are in that process. Okay, so next I want to introduce our speaker. Please welcome Lowell Huffman to the virtual stage with me. Hi. So Lowell works at the intersection of compliance, data, and real-world implementation. He's the director of channel partnerships at rePurpose Global, and he really helps brands navigate these packaging regulations to make sense of what's required. rePurpose is really well known for their plastic recovery programs, but they also are super deep in the EPR space and supporting producers, brands to navigate this compliance. Lowell, I really love that you are really excited about making data accessible. And I love that you bring a passion for education to this work. So we're really happy to have you join us. And I happen to know that you are a dog lover. So the whole pet industry is super relevant to you. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Well, thank you, Allison. Thank you, PSC team. Really enjoy the partnership that we've embarked upon and continue to be excited about what we can achieve together. And thank you all to you. I was chatting with the PSC team before we hopped on today. Obviously, we know EPR is a hot topic, but it's one that I think a lot of people would have all the reason in the world to not show up and grapple with these challenging things. So thank you very much. I always like to say that extraordinary change requires extraordinary people, and what we are trying to do with these EPR schemes across these states is substantial amount of change, and change is very hard for human beings. Um, it's like one of the hardest things that we could potentially do. And what we're being tasked with through these EPR frameworks is a tremendous amount of change. And I just appreciate each and every one of you showing up to grapple with these things. So um, we're going to go through EPR today. A couple of disclaimers. One, I always kick these things off with two disclaimers. I think one is more important than the other. The first one is that the EPR and labeling and packaging regulatory landscape is rapidly changing faster than what I have witnessed as far as trends on TikTok. This thing is evolving on three simultaneous axes. and creating quite a bit of challenges, not only in the regulations, but again, how much change is happening almost on a weekly basis. If a lot of you that have reported in multiple states, as you answered that poll, you know that almost on a weekly basis, SB 54 is being updated, modified, or finalized. So again, this is not do not consider this legal advice. What we have today, our team has worked incredibly hard to make sure it's up to date as of April 14th at 11:30 a.m. Eastern time. But we do expect things to continue to change and evolve over time. So just make sure you keep that in mind. Secondly, and again, I think this disclaimer might be the more important one, besides the fact that I'm not an attorney and this is not legal advice, is that um, when one chooses to grapple with new regulations such as EPR or anything of this magnitude, there could be uncommon side effects. What you're looking at, folks, is a kind of picture story of my journey dealing with sustainability and regulations such as EPR. I've worked for the last decade in drinking water infrastructure, now in waste infrastructure. And what you see on the left is a very happy, very sane individual. As I began to understand, like the outcomes of what we're trying to achieve with these laws, whether it's in drinking water or waste management, are pretty simple. It's like the thousands of pages of laws that get written that kind of complicate things. And what you see progressing across your screen is me slowly losing my mind. And I just want everyone to be aware of that. But don't do that. Don't suffer in silence. Phone a friend. Talk to our team. Talk to your friends at the PSC. I see Steffi on here. She's an amazing listener. Reach out to a friend. Talk through these things. Don't let yourself go like I have. But again, just wanted to be a cautionary tale, if you will. Before we dive in, Allison, if we could launch that second poll just to help me understand what stresses you out the most. I have curated quite a bit of content for today. I do get a little verbose or long-winded, so I want to try to make sure that I understand where a lot of the people are on here. I know, again, it's very hard because everyone's on their own GPS route to EPR compliance, but some of the stuff today I'm going to kind of rip through. The idea is that there's a lot of content in here that hopefully you could use as a kind of a self-study guide once this is done, because I could literally talk about EPR for probably a 2 full day seminar, and we only have about 40 minutes today or 30 minutes to go through this. So, Allison, I don't know. I can't see the poll results unless maybe you.
Sure, I can
Okay.
hop back on. So I see one word California seems to be winning right now. So California regulation stressing people out. You got a lot of people saying all of the above. Send help for getting data, understanding which states apply, no dedicated headcount, and budgeting for fees we can't predict. So I'm sensing some stress out there.
Okay. That's super helpful. Yeah, we put in one word California just because I do think that there's a lot of brands or producers that were able to kind of, get by in Colorado and Oregon, just given how kind of similar they were. But yeah, SB 54 does kind of create like a whole different challenge that I think are throwing people for a loop. So thank you for filling those out. That's incredibly helpful context for us as we think about where to focus today's presentation. So I know Allison really touched on this, but I do, for those of you that are brand new to this, I just want to spend probably 2 minutes going over, um, you know, what is EPR and what's involved. Now, Allison did a great job explaining kind of how this shifts the framework of responsibility of packaging waste from local governments and municipalities to the producers themselves. I think that's relatively clear. Now, what may still be a little bit, up in the air is like, how is this actually like carried out? So again, for those of you that are new and are kind of at, EPR 101, you have the states themselves that write the legislation as they do any other piece of legislation in the state. And that is typically then given to a primacy agency or an agency within the state. So in Oregon, it's the Department of Environmental Quality. In California, it's CalRecycle. In Colorado, it's the Department of Environmental Health and Human Safety, I believe, CDPHE, who kind of write the rules around the regulation. And then what they do is they hire what's called a pro or an SO. A PRO stands for a producer responsibility organization, or SO, a sustainability organization that is essentially a partner in enforcing those laws. And I think that we are very fortunate here in the States to have a single PRO system as of today. That PRO has been the CAA. So they've been elected or selected to basically carry these out along with the states and the agencies therein to conduct the feasibility studies, set budgets, help the states understand what's feasible as far as what they want to achieve with these programs, whether it be, increasing recycling rates, getting more infrastructure, updating infrastructure, all the things that come along. And we'll touch on some of those today. But very important organization. They are driven and started by producers such as yourselves. And I think that they are a very large advocate, but sometimes get wrapped up in the fact that people think that they're the ones that are responsible for the laws, et cetera. They are your advocates. And I very much encourage you all to get to know CAA. They're growing rapidly and trying to do the most to help you all. And then again, on the other side is all the covered entities, or those liable producers that sell the products and packaging into the states that fall into these EPR laws. So again, I touched on who the CAA is. If you have questions or you need to know more, please reach out to either us or the producer services team at CAA. Wonderful people doing really great work to make these programs a success. We get a lot of questions about, who is obligated, and the answer is, well, it's kind of complicated. A producer means a couple different things, both on how a state defines what a liable producer is. That is typically in the form of revenue, so size of company, the amount of packaging that's in scope, so tonnage. Generally, in Oregon and Colorado, the global revenue threshold, that is not just the revenue of the liable entities that you're selling, it is global revenue that your company ingests is over roughly $5 million, you're likely going to be considered a liable producer. In California, it's a bit different. They only go on in-state revenue. So revenue in the state of California that exceeds $1 million, you are likely going to be considered a liable entity. And again, that is not just $1 million of the packaging, it is your total revenue that is generated from the state. And then there's kind of like a decision tree of, if you are not the brand owner or the manufacturer, if you import, there are kind of like a decision tree of, if you are not this, then you are this, then you are the producer, the liable entity. There are a million or almost infinite scenarios where you might be a parent or a subsidiary. This is where I think, again, legal counsel can certainly help interpret how you are defined. Our team is always open and willing to have those discussions and give our best estimate, but sometimes, a legal opinion of how you are structured, just given how, LLCs and LTDs and all the incorporations vary. You want to make sure that you're very wrapped up there. So a couple things, what we're looking at, and the reason that I think this is a timely webinar and why it's so important that you're all here is because we have a very big month coming up. We have 7 states with active EPR packaging laws. We have 3 states that have already completed active reporting cycles with producers. And we're just kind of like on this, we do anticipate more. We're keeping a very close eye on like places like Massachusetts and New Jersey, where, EPR legislation is continuing to be written and put before different judiciary and legislative bodies. And we've already been through a couple of invoice cycles. So some of you on here that have already done that multiple state reporting in that first poll, you've likely already received your January invoices. But the big thing that I want to call out is this slide here. I am calling May 31st CAA Day. It is a very important day because we've got some annual supply reports, which is that detailed reporting in Oregon, Colorado, and California, as well as the source reduction plan and the annual supply report for California. Now, those ISRs, those individual source reduction plans, are likely going to be due no later than August. We're still waiting on some finalization there. But I also wanted to call out that, Minnesota, Maryland, and the state of Washington have what are called simplified early reporting, that pre-program reporting. Um, these programs require a tremendous amount of resourcing, time, money to get stood up. So um, the simplified reports are essentially just a more simplified version of what the annual supply, like the more detailed category by category, like the 60 plus in California or Colorado and Oregon, or the 97 that are in California. But May 31st represents a very big day. This is a lot of different data. You can see on this slide the data year is either 2025 or 2023. We have a couple of different, again, annual supply. We've got simplified supply. We have the 2023 baseline producer report that's due or needs to be updated once SB 54 is finalized here in the coming weeks. And then those individual source reduction plans that are going to be due. There's a tremendous amount of work that has to get done. And for a lot of you that kind of selected all of the above in the second poll, I think you're realizing that we are on a pretty tight timeline between now and May 31st. And there's a tremendous amount of data that has to be combed through, collected, sorted, mapped, and ultimately reported. And these have real economic consequences, as we've seen with the hundreds of brands that we've worked with and the probably close to 1,000 reports that we've generated on behalf of brands over the past year. There's an infinite amount of places that these seemingly innocent errors can have tremendous consequences. And we're now getting word that like even CAA is receiving some initial simplified reports and saying, you know what, this doesn't seem right. You need to go back and double check. So a lot of the kinks and the wrinkles and the initial rollout of these plans are beginning to come to fruition. CAA is beginning to find some of its rhythm and how they want to begin to direct and implement these plans. And I hear a lot about enforcement. How is this going to be enforced? Again, CAA is really figuring that out and beginning to understand where it can yield, some of its power as the implementer or the pro. Second thing is upcoming fees, like what you can expect as a liable producer that has to report on EPR this year. Again, some of you that have reported, you probably already received your January invoices for both Colorado and Oregon. Again, those will come in 250% installments for your previous year 2024 data that you submitted last year. And there'll be another one in July. And then California is going to be, establishing those early pre-program fees. Now, again, I have to caution that, California is a big state. It's an economic powerhouse. It hosts a lot of, the majority of biggest, what is it? I think it's like the fourth largest economy, has over 8 or 10% of the U.S. population. I want to caution people, these early fees are not to be necessarily like used as a way to forecast for future years, because this is such a simplified report on a very small number of overall categories. Make sure that you talk to our team or a consultant or somebody about how you can begin to really forecast and think through California's covered material category list and what that means for 2027 and beyond, because these early fees really don't capture what brands are going to be liable for. There's just not the nuance in reporting. These are meant just to help the program get stood up. And then I just wanted to call out that Maine is still in the process, I believe, of picking their SO or their pro, but we do anticipate an early startup fee or pre-program fee sometime later this year, possibly Q3 or Q4. So just something to keep your eyes on. And the fact is that that earlier slide where I showed bills to keep an eye on, we do anticipate more adoption of EPR, in the tune of 2 to 3 states per year. So for some of you, that are feeling overwhelmed, any way that we can help you, socialize or normalize the story of asking for help or resources internally. I know our organization as well as PSC is always willing to help you get what you need to meet some of these brand new deadlines. One of the things I get asked a lot is what if I just wait and see, or what if I don't comply? So the states do empower CAA as the implementer of the program to assess fines. These can be up to $25 to $50,000 a day. We haven't seen that, and I do expect that as we get this first and second step out of the gate with U.S. packaging EPR, I think CAA and the states want this to be as positive and as flexible as possible. But I will say, if you are a liable producer and you don't comply, you are putting a lot of extra weight on those who are registering, because once a budget is set, once a state and the CAA determine how much the program needs to generate, but they don't adjust the budget. So if there are 10,000 potential producers that need to pay and only 2,000 pay, that initial year, those 2,000 companies that registered are going to pay more than their fair share. My point is, in the second year, as CAA better understands who didn't register and who is likely a liable producer, they will recruit you, give you the option. If you do want to participate, great, you're going to pay your back fees plus a penalty, or they have the ability to blacklist those products from being sold in the state if compliance isn't met. So while we don't see a ton of enforcement actions that they can take in the first year and a half of these programs, it really typically is just a matter of time. And my next slide here about these eco-modulation details that are being updated in like Oregon and Colorado. If you are a delinquent reporter, or haven't been in the good books or good graces of CAA, they can take the ability for you to qualify for these bonuses. You can see they have, like in Colorado, 3 different bonuses that if you qualify for those, you can decrease your fees by a significant percent, up to 5% for the qualifying or relevant SKUs. They can basically retract those bonuses, but leave the disincentives in play for you. All to say that my hope is that if you are a liable producer and you don't know how to move forward, reach out to us. We're happy just to help guide you. We're not going to like hold you to the fire or anything. We want this to succeed for a number of reasons. As Allison said, I like to say that rePurpose has been doing or created the first global voluntary EPR program with our plastic recovery, which so many of the brands on here have been long-standing purveyors of. So we thank you for that. But we know the good that can come when we make investments in infrastructure, and we want this to succeed. So if you have questions, please reach out to us. We want to get you set on the right path so that you are in compliance and can take advantage of all the incentives and bonuses that these programs are going to offer. Quick update. I just want to talk about, again, SB 54 has kind of been this moving target. We do expect the law to be finalized by May 1st, which means basically there's going to be a 30-day window for that initial 2023 supply data that's your source reduction baseline to be finalized. Lots happening here. And I actually read through the comments. There are a number of great associations that represent a lot of brands, probably some on this call, that are really trying to do their best to make sure that the California law is the best version of itself that it can be. All this to say, this is still a little bit further to go. And just don't forget that that August timeline for those source reduction reports are likely going to be due after the finalization of SB 54. And just a quick call out that what California is trying to achieve with their law, for those of you that said one word California is my concern, is that they want a few things, right? They want 100% of packaging to be recyclable or compostable by 2032. They want to see a statewide recycling rate of 65%, which is a very large increase from where they're at currently. And then what I've been talking about, and if you're like, source reduction, what does that mean? They want to see a net 25% reduction of plastic material by weight and the total number of plastic components that are coming into the state by 2032. And that 2023 baseline that I was talking about, that you're going to, if you've already submitted that by like last November, when the rules finalized later in this month or May, you'll have 30 days to either update or make modifications or just simply resubmit it. But that is going to be your baseline for how you kind of hit these source reduction goals. So in 2027, they're going to be expecting brands to say, based on your 2023 baseline that you submitted, what is your individual plan as a producer to reduce the weight and number of components of your packaging 10% in 2027, 20% in 2030, and then 25% by 2032. And they, again, kind of specify how they want, whether it's reuse, refill, or elimination, or lightweighting, and things like that. This is a whole thing. We've done actually whole 90-minute webinars on this, so I don't have a chance to dive too deep on this today. But if source reduction is of concern or you want to learn more, please reach out. Again, my colleague, my amazing colleague, Jenny Hansen's in the chat answering questions. We'd be happy to send you a link where you could just set up some time and chat with us, and our experts can walk you through the general landscape and hopefully get you set on the right path. So again, this is just kind of a quick 4-box hit of how to prepare for California. Again, 2023 baseline, some upcoming deadlines, and the other thing I wanted to call out is hopefully we're going to see a de minimis rule exemption, meaning that when this hopefully is finalized by the end of May, we hope to get some line of sight on what is quote unquote too small to measure. As of today, right, adhesives, glues, labels, inks, all that sort of stuff, they're saying you need to report it all. And it could very much stay that way. You know, California is very stringent on what they're hoping to get insight into, what is actually coming into our state, what are we being forced to deal with, to collect, to sort, to haul, to clean, and ultimately to, you know, have proper end of life. So that remains to be seen. But as of today, basically be prepared to report on everything, regardless of how small you might think it is. Make sure you keep your calendars set, reminders, and make sure you have those notifications on so you can hear them. Sometimes when I mute those, I miss really important things. Again, you know, if you find yourself confused or kind of getting upside down, you know, again, phone a friend, reach out. There's a lot of people, a lot of resources. Like obviously I'm biased. I love our team. I love what we're doing. But there's a lot of help and a lot of really smart people out there. So make sure you reach out and get yourself squared away. I want to spend a little bit of time kind of talking about a step-by-step process, right, of how to kind of like get yourself oriented, maybe if you're new. And, you know, if you've already reported, maybe a couple of things that you could pick up along the way here. But I always say that, like, I was in a wedding a couple of years ago, and I have 2 left feet, not really a strong dancer. So, you know, but a dance is a beautiful thing if you put the right movements in the right order and the right sequence, and you're not smashing your partner's toes. EPR, similarly, is like a kind of a beautiful ballet, if you will. Certain number of things have to happen in a certain sequence, and if you do them out of order, it can kind of mess up the beauty of the outcome, so to speak. So we've kind of set this kind of 6-step process of, you know, starting with determining obligations and compiling all your information, and how you kind of determine, you know, how it's like I look at EPR as kind of like a tax, kind of like navigating a tax code, even though don't quote me that it's not like a tax or anything like the US tax code, but there are options, things that you know, depending on how you're structured or depending how you classify things, there are ways to like make sure that you're reporting accurately and not underreporting or over-reporting. So we want to kind of like help you understand what those things are. Everything starts with determining your obligate. You know, am I an obligated producer in this specific state? You might be in one and not the other, based on how they're, again, looking at revenue, company size, and the tonnage of what they would consider a high volume producer, a low volume producer, or maybe an exempt producer because you just don't send enough stuff to burden the infrastructure in the state. So again, our team can certainly help. If you have an in-house counsel, please have them review how each state is determining what they say is a legal or a liable producer in the state. If you are, you know, then it's really just about understanding, you know, this is a relatively simple equation of how much packaging did I send into the state, how much did I sell, putting that together, and then, you know, getting the output. But again, that is a very large challenge because A lot of this information lives in a lot of different formats, a lot of different spreadsheets, platforms, people, suppliers. It's a lot to do. But at the end of the day, it's a relatively basic equation. It's just about the challenge of pulling all that, centralizing it, and getting it formatted in a way that you can actually do the math. Um, can't stress enough, if you do need, again, I have seen so many companies that are structured in a million different ways, and make sure you get some probably legal advice on your entity definitions, how you're structured, just to make sure. And that does require a very, very specific skill set. The second step after that determination of liability is really compiling all of the packaging and sales data. And I know it seems simple, but that output, when you put those things together, is the total weight of the covered materials consumed by the state for that reporting period. So this on your screen is just kind of a look at, you may have 50 products, you may have one product or two products, but you're basically going to say how many units were supplied to that state. What was that product made of? Did you have corrugated cardboard? Did you have poly-coated fiber? Did you have, all this different stuff, the weights, and then do some basic multiplication. And then, you have basically your gross tonnage for each covered category. Now, again, Colorado, Oregon, roughly 60 to 65 categories. California, there's going to be north of 95. And California is also requiring you to measure the plastic weight separately, as well as the number of components separately, which can become a little bit challenging when you start to think about what's considered a plastic component, if it's detachable or non-detachable. We'll talk a little bit about that here in a moment. There's a couple different options you have for determining those weights. We like to always recommend, I always say that more granular data equates to more accurate reporting. And that is what we try to say. Specific material reporting method is exact weights per package, per component. Highly recommended. Again, when you're not using industry calculators or averages, you are really honing into your specific scenario instead of relying on averages. But the CAA and the states knew that given the large amount of data that they're requesting and requiring, there are likely going to be a lot of gaps. So they do offer the ability to use averages and sector calculators and apportionment formulations, et cetera. But those should only be used where you truly have a gap. And we have identified several bottlenecks where, and I hate to say it, but all of this information does exist. There are receipts for everything. The amount of packaging that you bought, who you bought it from, how you use it, what was shipped. There are receipts. It's just how do you combine and collect all that information, especially on such a tight timeline? But where you might hit a snag or can't get it, there usually are some you know, assumptions that you can make. And it's wildly important that you calculate and notate where you've made those assumptions. Those are going to be part of your methodology that you end up submitting along with your report to CAA to say, hey, here's the kind of data we used, or here's the kind of calculators or industry averages. They're going to want to know how it is that you arrived at your total weight and sales numbers. So it's very important that you understand what these different things are and how to use them, and also how they can potentially, be a benefit or a potential liability for you in the reporting process. Again, I don't want to belabor the point, but more granular data is better. So make sure you're, reaching out to your most critical path suppliers that you work with. Make sure you ask clearly and explain why you need this information. Sometimes suppliers get requests and there's an empty template. They don't know what you're asking for, why you're asking for it, and they just kind of brush it off as not important. We do find that getting information from suppliers can sometimes be a really challenging thing, especially if you're using tens or hundreds of different suppliers throughout your supply chain. So wanted to bring kind of like a real world example. As Allison said, I just adopted a beautiful 2-year-old dog. We got him some spray, and I was thinking like, man, this spray bottle for his flea and tick stuff is it's amazing. I don't want to give him that, the stuff that he has to eat. But I was thinking about, I look at everything now through an EPR lens. I'm like, oh man, this came in like a carton or a case. what is that classified material fee? It's got a bottle. It has a screw off cap. It has, this nozzle that probably is a multi-material. All of these things have to be kind of broken down and submitted depending on how the state is categorizing. And then you got to say, how many units did I ship? In this case, it's like 10,500 of these were sold. Well, did they all go to California? Did 2,500 go here? So again, this really becomes, I think people start to understand like how complex and how nuanced this data is, and the fact that because no format is unified against all these different reporting formats that you're probably pulling this from, it's a very large undertaking, especially in a 30 or 40-day window that we have to operate in. Let's see. I want to, as I said earlier about, you know, looking at this as kind of like how you navigate doing your taxes. And I know whoa, is it tax day today? Oh, crap. Maybe it's here tomorrow. Uh-oh. See, I'm a terrible example. I got to get that done. But you can apply for like an exemption or credits or all these different things based on, do you have kids? Do you have dependents? Again, each state kind of determines how you should report. And again, this is where you probably need like an EPR expert in your corner to help say, how should you be reporting? Should you report in a simplified reporting process because you're a low volume producer because you don't meet these thresholds, or do you have to, or should you have the choice to do a more detailed reporting because you can have some savings and not have to use these kind of estimated or category ranges. There is a lot that comes with this, and again, I think just like having a TurboTax or an H&R Block professional, having someone that knows these things and how to kind of not manipulate the system, but where there are options and choices to be made, you want to make sure you're making the right ones. One of the last steps in this 6-stage process is to create the report. Again, you got to have that methodology. This is what steps, what assumptions, if any, did you make? How did you come to these ultimate submissions of weight and sales data, which is going to be very, very, very important as part of your overall report when you submit in the CAA portal. And then, I like to always remind folks that this is a living, breathing document or set of data. This is not like a once and done, you wipe your hands and you say, I'm done. We're going to be, you saw earlier, California is on a path to 2032 with some very large scale goals. So annual reports, biannual, invoicing, tracking source reduction. Like this set of information is going to have to be very, very flexible, has to be updated ongoing. Again, it'll be a living, breathing data set for some time to come. So you really want to make sure that you have a plan and a way to ensure that you can update, modify, and track this information without having to kind of recreate the wheel every single reporting cycle. Just don't want that to get lost. The last thing before we kind of try to wrap up here and get to questions are how wildly cross-functional this process of getting information is. I know I've talked to a lot of folks that are kind of an accidental owner of EPR. They raised their hand and said, "Hey, I don't know what this is. I'll look into it." And they may not be a regulatory expert, but they are now tasked internally because this is new and no one is there's not an EPR like compliance specialist that has just been on staff for the past 10 years just waiting for this to happen. But again, this information lives in so many different places, both internally and externally, and it requires a lot of cross-functional collaboration. I always like to remind myself that at the end of the day, we have 26 letters in an alphabet that are designed to communicate some of the most complex things that we feel, the emotions that we have. And it's not sufficient. So when we ask for something and somebody doesn't have the context, they get a little frustrated, communication breaks down, and we have this like data stoppage. So just make sure that, you're trying to, be very cognizant of what you're asking for, how you're asking for it. A lot of people don't know what this is, especially if they're, in packaging or supply chain or finance. This is all new. There's a learning curve to all this. So, but just don't underestimate the power of very precise and accurate and thoughtful communication, both internally to your organization and to those that you work with in the supply chain. Um, and again, I think that our company has, we've been involved with our global recovery programs and tracking information. Um, we are incredibly proud of the compliance software that we've built, the hundreds of brands that we've onboarded within the last year. Again, the close to 1,000 reports that we've submitted on behalf of brands. And we love the pet industry. We love what you do. We love how you help us take care of our pets and enrich our lives. And we want to be here to help. We work with a number of suppliers and brands in the space, and we appreciate all the work that you entrust to us, and we'd love to do more, and we'd love to know how we could do better. Um, I am going to be leading. We are talking about this base camp, which is where we're at now, to the summit of May 31st, that CAA day. Myself and I have elected Svetlana, who oversees our compliance and sustainability team, as the president of global EPR. It's not a real thing, but if it was, she would be the one. Her and I are going to be leading a webinar later this month. Hopefully, have some SB 54 finalizations and some really hard-hitting stuff to walk through. So please feel free to join us. This is a repurpose-driven webinar, but we'd love to have the pet community and pet brands and suppliers join us on that journey to EPR Summit. So join us at April 29th at noon. And then I wanted to give this to you, to scan this QR code. And this is our supplier data collection playbook. I know there's probably a couple suppliers on here. This is designed for brands, producers to my point about communicating with external entities. Some best practices that we've learned through, again, all the work that we've done over the past 13, 14 months on ways to ensure that you can take a 4 to 6 month data cycle down to, a week or two, just by implementing some best practices. Again, kind of following a dance routine, if you will. And we have found that a lot of producers have found this specific thing. So this is a free resource. Scan the QR code, download the supplier data collection playbook and the guide. I think you'll find it incredibly helpful. So I'm going to shut up. I am so sick and tired of hearing my voice. I can only imagine you poor souls that are still with us. I'm going to dive into some of the questions. Hopefully, Jenny has been active in there, and we will open some things up for questions.
Well, first, a round of applause for you. I personally love the sound of your voice. I learned a ton, and you have some really excellent quotable moments. So while folks are typing any additional questions they thought of, some of my favorite moments, I really appreciated actually your progression of the hair growth. I mean, this is like a human issue, right? Like real people are dealing with this, and I appreciate your advice of don't let yourself go like you have. You said that EPR is like a beautiful ballet because the things have to happen in the right order at the right time. We're all marking our calendars for May 31st of CAA Day, so I learned so much and I really appreciate it. We have some great questions, and yes, we have some behind the scenes question and answers. So thank you, Jenny Hansen, who's on the brand partnership team, for being here. But one of the questions I definitely want to answer live. Can you just give a quick summary of what kind of packaging applies? For example, if a brand already has really widely recyclable packaging? Are they exempt from anything, or is it really just every type of packaging is probably applying?
Yeah, so if you are if considered a liable entity, as Allison, talked about a little earlier, I mean, all single-use packaging is in scope once you are technically identified as a liable producer. Now, The fee schedules that are applied to the covered material category, the CMC, in each state will vary. So things like, expanded polystyrene, which are hard to, they're big, they're bulky, they have to be densified. They place a higher burden on a recycling or waste management system. Those fees are going to be much higher than a single, mono or highly PCR content. So there are, cases where more sustainable or recyclable stuff are, you're going to be either incented or bonused once you report or make those clarifications in your report. But technically, all single-use packaging around a product in a state with an EPR regulation is likely going to be considered in scope.
Okay. So all single-use packaging, but in theory, if you are already using a more sustainable packaging, whatever that is, your fees will be less per pound, right?
Yeah, yeah, and that's the kind of the beauty of being able to aggregate and see all this is like, once you have your first initial report in, you're going to be able to see where you have the highest EPR material risk. And you can make decisions on, if I add 25% PCR, if I go from this, flexible multi-layered to a mono, um, you're going to be able to kind of see how those things play out and what would be the best alternative. Um, but it's really so important. That's why I was talking about that specific material data report is the more accurate you can get, the better you're going to be able to understand how you navigate the incentive or disincentive framework in the form of eco-modulation in the second, third, fourth, and fifth year of these programs.
Okay, great. You talked a little bit about enforcement, but you also know that this is a common question. Can you just reiterate like which entity or agency is enforcing this state by state? And is there like communication between the states?
Oh yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, in Oregon, the Department of Environmental Quality is the state agency that is taking the state's legislation and writing the rules and regs, and then that agency hires the CAA. Ultimately, the CAA, is in charge of the program and the enforcement, and that is given to them by the state to do that. Um, they're the ones that collect the money. They're the ones that, we've seen some really cool outputs in Oregon. They were the first state to do this last March, and they've already deployed millions of dollars in the form of recycle on centers that have been deployed through CAA. Over 20,000 new recycling carts have been purchased and put out for curbside recycling and trucks and reimbursements to the actual MRFs and collectors and haulers. So CAA ultimately is the implementer and given power by the state and the state agencies that they work with, and there is a tremendous amount of communication and transparency between that. And again, I think that US EPR is, I think, probably like the most modern form of what we've learned from global EPR systems that have either succeeded or failed in the past. Some have been wrought with, fraud, waste, and abuse, and they've failed. We've seen some like the provincial Canadian EPR and EU and PPWR work very, very well. They're a bit more matured. So this single pro system, collaborating very closely with the states, I think gives the best chance for transparency of how funds are being collected and put to use. And then ultimately, the CAA having the ability to make enforcement action that they believe is in line with how the program is designed and should be carried out.
Cool. One thing that I have actually heard to kind of maybe add to your list of the reasons why you should comply is that the more companies that participate in this, the more stable the fees will become over time. So there's kind of this concept of like a rising tide lifts all boats. Like if everyone is participating as they should, like together, this program will be more successful. Is that true? Do you feel the same way?
Yeah, 100%. The magnitude of investment and change, again, I am from small town Indiana. I grew up in a town of 600 people. My family didn't take out the trash. We burned it. We took it to the burn pile. Which, the fact that that was in my lifetime is kind of insane to me. What we're trying to do is step change. And, when you look at a state like California, which is geographically very large, There are a ton of challenges just to, collection and sortation. This requires everyone to be part of this. And one of the biggest concerns that CAA in these states have is this concept called free ridership. This is brands that are liable producers that don't register, don't pay into the system. That creates a tremendous burden for those that do. And it requires, CAA in the states to do a lot of outreach and recruitment instead of focusing on the infrastructure investments and advancements that they're trying to make. But yeah, the in order for this to succeed and for the states to achieve the goals that they've set out, it's going to require a large, overwhelming majority of brands to educate themselves and to understand how and where they're liable and be part of the system so that we can, I always say there's two things that we can't make more of. That's time and land. And at some point, whether it's generations ahead, but we will run out of land to fill with our junk. So we need to figure out how we build infrastructure systems that are capable of properly dealing with the end of life of the stuff that's coming into the states.
System-wide change. Love it. I think we have time for at least one more question. There's some more coming in. I want to talk about the source reduction piece, because I feel like that's like a unique puzzle piece to this. And the question is the reduction on plastic based on virgin material, and therefore like the amount of recycled content is not included in that number?
This is where I wish Svetlana was on the call. She has really, I have been traveling a ton, so I have a little bit of CAA studying to do on what they've just released on the source reduction as far as like what counts. Um, because there's a lot of interesting nuance in how like they're looking at that 25% source reduction number by 2032. Because, it's like, how do you take plastic out of a jug, right? Like it's a plastic jug for heaven's sake. So what do you do? They've got a lot of rules and kind of pathways on what is considered and what counts and what doesn't, and what they're trying to do as far as reuse and refill and all this different stuff. So I don't want to answer that because I don't have clarity. But Allison, if we could collect like just an email, like I want to put that in front of Svetlana on our team just to make sure that we accurately and clearly kind of respond to that in the proper way. Because I don't know.
Sure. And also this was one that Jenny had the chance to answer, and she had said source reduction is based on total amount of plastic usage, but including PCR is an alternative pathway to achieve source reduction if reduction can't be achieved through other pathways. So,
Yeah.
but yeah,
So
we can follow up with that one.
I was going to say, like, there are rules. Like, you have to do a certain number of things first before that qualifies. So there, again, it's sequence and that interesting ballet of like before you can do this, you have to exhaust A, B, and C. But ultimately, yes, it's just about how do you get to that yes.
Okay. And in the chat, we have the link to the 5 stated pathways, and there's a link to that. So, so much to learn and happening so fast. Let me just quickly scan. I'm sorry for the folks who are here if we can't get to your question, because we've had a lot of really good ones in the last few seconds. Let's see. I think let me just ask, like, how do people get in touch with Repurpose Global if they want to
So
follow up with you?
Um, you can scan the QR code that I just put up. That'll get you a calendar of our team. Again, folks like Jenny, Svetlana, we have a tremendous team that is answering questions all day. So please, scan the QR code. That'll take you to our team's calendar, and you can schedule time. And we would be happy. Again, like we're not going to hold you to anything. We genuinely, again, based on the work that we do globally, this is really an exciting time, and we want to see US EPR have the most success it can. So we are happy to educate and have conversations with you all.
Great. Same here. So yeah, if we didn't get to your question, please reach out to PSC and or Repurpose Global, and we will try to connect you with the right answer, because we do have some very specific questions that we didn't have time to get to today. Lowell, what closing words do you want to leave our audience with today?
Um, Call your parents and tell them you love them. We could do more of that. We need more love in the world. I would say keep asking questions. Don't stop until you're satisfied, until you have clarity. If there's one thing I know, and I've worked in regulations and compliance for a long time, I am always amazed at what we are capable of. Once people have an understanding, once that light bulb clicks, like look out, they're on a path that is beautiful. And they're look, we are trying to consume thousands of pages of very challenging regulation. So stick with it. If you get frustrated, go to a rage room and throw a vase at a wall. I've actually done that. I went to a rage room a couple weeks ago just to like smash stuff. They do recycle everything once those electronics are smashed. But stick with it. This is a journey. We're on it together. You know, hang out with your peers, get a support group, talk to us, scream at us, but don't lose sight of what we're trying to achieve. This is a good thing.
Here, here. I will plus one to that, that like there are really stressful, extreme emotions about this because it is a compliance burden. But then I also feel really excited and hopeful about the positive change that this can cause, not just for the pet industry, but like worldwide in all CPG industries. So I will also end by just saying thank you so much, Lowell. And thank you so much for the rePurpose folks behind the scenes answering questions and also just being an amazing partner. Thank you, WPA, again for the sponsorship. Thank you also for our attendees here. Your participation is really excellent, and we appreciate you being here. All right. Well, thanks, everyone. We can wrap there.
Thank you all. Have a great day.